Lost one of my kidneys. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to John Dudley Speaks. I'm your host, Thanos. Toronto rapper, singer, producer Nav got his start in the early to mid-2010s, catching a big break working on Drake's mammoth diss track against Meek Mill back-to-back, gaining him a lot more cred in the SoundCloud sphere. Myself dropped in early 2016 and became a sleeper hit, eventually leading to his signing to the Weeknd's XO record label. With a feature on Birds in the Trap Sing McKnight, Nav had all the cosigns needed to make a big splash, and his The Weeknd assisted some way helped to boost the popularity of his self-titled mixtape that he dropped later that year. About 3 months later, though, Nav collaborated with famed producer Metro Boomin for their joint tape Perfect Timing, which is a surprising auto-crooner trap triumph. Nav was pretty much bigger than ever at this point, coasting along the trap trends of the SoundCloud era into his debut album Reckless, and it exists. It's not entirely special due to Nav's wooden performance and checked-out delivery, which is a problem that would persist on his feature on Astroworld, at least when you can hear it, as well as his 2019 and 2020 records Bad Habits and Good Intentions. But luckily, Emergency Tsunami and Demons Protected by Angels were able to change the tide for Nav, emphasizing eclectic trap production that was cinematic despite Nav's sometimes poor mic presence. And that brings us to On My Way to Rexdale, clearly Nav's best record yet, that while still having issues that are practically unfixable, boasts assured production and an expansive world building that learns the best lessons from his peers. Nav executive produced this project just like his albums before it, but unlike its predecessors, On My Way to Rexdale does a much better job in establishing a unified atmosphere. The serene guitars on Sinking start us off with a reverberating, enveloping aesthetic that glides into the cloudy trap soul of the press play assisted You, which benefits from slick progressions in its neo-noir tint. I was all in on Unlimited, which was helmed by Oji Volta and Twisco, and that makes sense given the former's involvement with music, but unlike that record, this track oozes with fluffy synths and chord patterns that are textbook trap pop, eschewing the usual antics that Cardi and Nav get into, with an illustrious, triumphant anthem. I can take or leave some of the more traditional trap-R&B instrumentals on this one, like Stay Up, Keep Going, Get to You, or Need You, which feels a little too adjacent to 2021's Life of a Don, coming together way too derivative and dull. But I found tracks like Metro's Real Me to show that he and Nav really do have something when they connect, finding strength in the low-key tone and the faint, haunting vocal samples. And Oz's work on Back to Business is reminiscent of an early 2020s Drake song in a positive way, deciding to lean more into the colder, harder edge rap lane that those tracks exist in. I also liked how a lot of this album's pastiche feels like an old mid-2010s Weeknd album, as it doesn't retread those ideas as much as it presents them in a modern context, sometimes with Mike Dean flair. So I think that Nav comes through in that respect as a curator more than he ever has. Though trap albums do often suffer from their weightless lyrical content, I think it's interesting how Nav pivots from the usual tropes of drugs and sex into ideas surrounding loneliness. Sinking highlights Nav's anxieties over abandonment, so naturally a song like You dives into his desperation for connection in an immature bid to retain cheap intimacy. Does that mean the lyricism itself is good? No, but the effort is there to speak on topics that are somewhat different than what Nav is used to. So I think that counts for something on tracks like You and I and Need You. Back to Business, BURBS, and Unlimited, on the contrary, slide into the brag rap bag pretty nicely, not indulging corniness too much this time, even if there are elements to it that are severely underwritten. But BURBS, specifically of that crop, hits the rags to riches angle in a way that avoids cliche to a fault, yet I think that Keep Going handles that the best on this record, since there's a formal rebuke of fame and accolades from Nav that's potent and believable. Not all the song structures are particularly engaging though, to be honest, and the songwriting formula does sour once we've heard him repeat the same themes and tread the same ground, but overall it's a huge step up from the thin writing that he made his name on years ago. I could easily sit here and criticize Nav's lifeless delivery on past albums, and I could easily sit here and criticize him for all the things that he hasn't changed, but that would just be silly when the proof is in front of us that Nav can make fun songs, and sometimes that's all an artist needs to do. The auto-crooning subgenre doesn't exactly necessitate acrobatic vocal talents, and while an artist like Don Toliver adds a touch of soul to You, Nav still finds areas on this album to stand out from his peers in his own way. The juxtaposition of Cardi's rough flows vocals and Nav's quirky, hokey delivery on Unlimited is super exciting, overflowing with personality. The rap cuts, furthermore, have a steely, cool demeanor like on Back to Business, where Nav takes a page out of the Travis and Abel playbook in perfecting his aura and presence on the mic. That being said, the repetition, once again, is a massive drawback in providing Nav the space he needs to feel like he's a cut above. Get To You, Red, and Real Me struggle to differentiate themselves in terms of command, mainly because Nav kind of sleepwalks through the attack on the track, reminding me of how someone like Selena Gomez doesn't necessarily bring the kind of vibrance needed for the material at hand. Pain Away does benefit quite a bit from its production, but still we're dealing with instrumentals that need more punch from the artist that's taking them on. So I felt like although Nav's improvements on the mic are notable, his lack of energy and individuality can make this record tiresome. At 14 tracks and 36 minutes, On My Way to Rexdale is smart in how it sequences and paces out this track listing, doing a fantastic job setting a vibe similar to Starboy or Utopia. But where I wish Nav had done a better job is in the pacing of the individual tracks, because at times it feels like a lot of these songs just end. Sinking, Red, Stay Up, and You and I could have maybe used another coda or bridge to tie the whole structure together, but instead the energy just fizzles out and the songs tend to land with a thud. I mean, even a big highlight like BURBS is under 2 minutes, but I would have preferred Nav to push harder to tack on some depth to see what he can do with that kind of concept. However, as much as it can be a peculiar listen in terms of its track lengths and monotony, there's a ton of replay value amongst the bangers here. Unlimited is a total blast, Pain Away is a strong closer, and You has all the makings of a hit R&B record. And put all together, these tracks are all placed in an order that allow for natural buildup of tension, something that other recent trap albums often mismanage. On My Way to Rexdale isn't a great record, but it's good at what it's offering to trap R&B fans, which is an immersive experience full of solid production and syrupy jams that are among Nav's best tracks so far. Does that change his sometimes robotic delivery? No, but it illuminates the fact that Nav has the ability to grow and develop his brand. It just might take a little while longer for him to do that. But hey, this is my perspective. If you're a Nav fan, this is a fun, flashy, well-tailored trap record. And if you're in search of something that might scratch that mid-2010s trap R&B itch with some newer, fresher aesthetics, you gotta check this one out. Alright, that's all I got. Bye!